Hello, everyone. This is Andrea Hedlund recording this session for you. If you could not take part in my session during the InnovateELT in Barcelona that happened a couple of days ago, this is a great chance for you to watch it. I mean, it's not going to be as fun as being there in person, but I hope this one helps you, get to know a little more about the wonderful mind, brain, and education science and some of the neuromyths that people have been talking about for a very long time now. So if you don't know who I am, I'm Andrea Hedlund. I work for National Geographic Learning. I'm actually studying right now here in the University of Bristol in England, and I'm studying psychology of education. I also got a scholarship. Not sure you're familiar with the Chevening scholarships, but if you're not, you should look it up because it's a great opportunity for you to study in the UK. And I really loved the conference. I think it was wonderful. I had no idea it was going to be so much fun and a lot of competent, talented people, and beer and drinks. That's even better. So, by the way, if you were not lucky enough to meet this little guy here, his name is Mr. Trunk. He's been following me around for a couple of years now. So just check him out. He has a hashtag, Mr. Trunk Travels. He's been to, I think, 15 countries already. Yes. And you know what? I think he represents a lot of neuroscience, the journey that I've been on, because people say that elephants never forget, right? Do they? They have bigger brains than we do. And this is a very beautiful picture of the brain that you can see there, the connections in the brain. So our brains have there are 86 billion neurons and a lot of connections. Each one of those neurons can connect with 1,000 more, 1,000,000 more. So it is really intricate. It's a very complex organ. Some authors throughout history have said that the brain is more complex than the whole universe. I don't think so, to be honest. I think, if the universe contains the brain must be a little less complex than the universe, right? But anyway, if you want to follow me on social media, there, you can find all the information you need. I have a very cool blog. That's what I think anyway. And I post a lot of things about neuroscience and cognitive psychology and the MBE science also. And you can send me an email. You can join my Facebook group, or you can follow me on Instagram. If you post anything, if you want me to follow you, you can use the hashtag ADC Rocks. That's a course that I'm offering, and MBE Brazil. That's the special interest group that I represent in Brazil. Okay, and that's it. I'll give you some time to read this while I drink some tea. Yep. So what do you think? Do you agree with this? And you know what? I got this a couple of months ago, actually almost a year ago, while talking to some peers. We were discussing the things that we teach at regular schools in Brazil. And then somebody mentioned this, and I'm pretty sure somebody famous said that, but I couldn't find who said that. So let's just say it is unknown. And I do agree with this to a certain extent, of course. Maybe it is important to prioritize the digestive system of a worm over the functioning of their own brain, the kids' brains, but I don't think so. I think we should probably know how our brains work so that we can work aligned with what our brains can help us do, and then maximize, learning and everything else that we do, because, the brain controls basically everything that we do, right? And this is the queen of MBE, and I'm going to discuss her work a lot from now on, and I'm going actually to suggest her book if you're interested in knowing more about the mind-brain education science. Her name is Tracy Tokuhama Espinosa, and she said back in 2010, and I'm going to read this one: all teachers should embrace medicine's first rule, which is do no harm. And then during my session in Barcelona, I asked, do you think we are doing harm by not knowing how our brains work and doing things sort of, because we've done them for centuries or millennia, because they are part of the teaching tradition. Even though they might not work, sometimes they can do, they can have the opposite effect, actually, make students not learn and traumatize students. Are we doing harm? So we have to stop and ask ourselves this question, I think. And I think, yes, sometimes we are doing harm, but not always. And I think, to be very honest, things that we've been doing for a long time do work. I mean, people have learned, people have studied at schools, they have learned things, and that means that something is right. We are doing something right. But maybe we could do things better if we looked at the science, right? Now, what science am I talking about? I'm talking about the MBE science, which is basically bringing together three different areas that communicate, of course. And the first area is the area that studies the mind. And I'm going to give you 3 seconds to tell me which area studies the mind. It's psychology, right? So first thing is cognitive psychology, social psychology as well. And then the area that studies the brain. So which area studies the brain? 3. So yes, neuroscience, especially cognitive neuroscience. And when I say cognitive, I'm referring to reasoning, thinking, things that are important for learning, attention, memory, okay? And finally, the area that studies education. It could be education, yeah, but there's another area that is about education as well, and it is pedagogy. Yes, pedagogy. So MBE is basically this incredible, I'd say joint effort between psychology, neuroscience, and pedagogy and education to bring together all the knowledge that those 3 areas have produced and inform teachers and also students on how we should, design our lessons, assess our students, and how learning happens or occurs in a more effective way, okay? I hope that makes sense, and this is the original image that was devised by Tracy Tokuhama Espinosa in her book, and I'm going to drink some tea now. And she emphasizes the fact that they should be on the same level. So you can see that they are not, psychology is not higher than education or neuroscience. They are on the same level because they are informing one another. And that's very important, because it's not right to say that this is based on neuroscience, so we should do as it says, because you know what? We've been doing things in education for a very long time, and many of the things we've been doing work for some reason, and maybe neuroscience doesn't even know how to explain it right. So we have to sort of drink from those sources and see what happens if we use this one or that one, and if we try this new strategy or that strategy, and try to explain why this thing worked and this thing didn't work, and keep in mind that they're just helping each other. The 3 areas are helping each other and helping us be better teachers, hopefully. That's the mission, I suppose, yeah? And of course, fight some of the consolidated neuromyths, right? So I'm going to show you some principles now. And the principles are pretty cool and very, I'd say, it's basically very concise, very objective. We have only 6 principles, and they're very general, but I think they can be applied in different ways. So let's get to work, right? And listen up. There will be 6 principles that you need to memorize. So I'm bringing your attention to here, right? So use the colors to help you, and don't tell your peers. So I did that during the session in Barcelona, and I'm going to tell you why after I show you the principles, okay? So pay attention to the 6 principles, the colors, and I'm going to test your memory right now. So please do not write anything down. Just look at the principles, read the principles with me, and then I'm going to ask you to try to remember them. Okay, so let's do it. Number one. And of course, I did something very cool, I hope. I scrambled the letters of some words for you to think about. So if you want, because I don't want to wait for you to do this, so I'm going to say pause. You can pause and then you can work out the meaning of the words. Just have to unscramble the letters, and then I will just give you the answer. So I will just say pause to give you a chance to figure them out, okay? So now you can pause. Okay, if you haven't paused, the answer is human brains are as unique as faces. What does that tell us about working with differentiation in the classroom, diversification as well? So, they're words, they're basically synonyms, right? But personalization, we love to use that word as well. Can we expect all the students in our classes to learn the same way, being given the same instruction, the same input? I think we've known that for a very long time now. But what are we doing to offer students with very unique, very different brains? What are we doing to offer them a different context and opportunities to learn their own way? So we have to start reflecting on those things. Number two, remember, try to work out the scrambled words. So pause the video right now. If you haven't paused, here's the answer. All brains are not equal because context and ability influence Nargilan or learning. Yes, indeed. We know that our brains are always changing, and that has a lot to do with context. We know that and also we know that the same context can be very different, can be experienced very differently by our students. So we have to be aware of those things, right? And we have to be aware that the same student, or you get 5 students from the same school, they've always had classes with the same teachers, the same classrooms, they will have very different levels of learning because of the context, because, not just, well, the context was basically the same, but we're talking about something deeper, something more within, what they were doing themselves, and that really yields a lot of different outcomes for the students, right? And then number 3, so pause the video right now. If you haven't paused, here's the answer. The brain is changed by experience. Indeed, we know that the brain you have now is different from the brain you had yesterday, and your brain after this session will be different from now, and so on. We're always making connections, and it on a molecular level, organically, to be honest. And so if you don't have certain experiences, you will never develop certain skills. And we're going to talk about this not so much later, but maybe you can read one of my blog posts. And then we have the brain is, pause the video right now. Yes, the brain is highly plastic, which means that, again, the brain is always making connections, is always changing, is rewiring itself. And there are moments in our lives that we can do that better. It's easier for our brains to do that. But there are moments, but it never really ends. We never lose plasticity completely, which means that we can always learn. So this is good news, because if our brains could not make new connections, then we would not be able to learn, but they can, always. Even the elderly, they can do that. And there was a study published a couple of months ago, if I'm not mistaken. I can put the link for you if you are interested, showing that very old people after their 60s, 70s, 80s, they are still making connections. They're still able to learn. That gives us hope, right? Everyone can learn. We just have to find the best way for everyone. And then number 5, the brain, pause the video. Okay, if you haven't paused, here it comes. The brain connects new information to old. Yes, it does. So remember Piaget, schema, prior knowledge, that was spot on, you know. We need to take our students' prior knowledge into consideration before we start building new knowledge. And we know that in the same classroom, even though the students have been through the same educational system, they have been having classes with the same teachers. They have pretty much very similar families in terms of, wealth, income or whatever. They have very different prior knowledge, right? And sometimes without a specific prior knowledge, there's a huge gap for you to overcome before you can start building new knowledge. And that's why they don't learn. And how much, how much room do you give your students in the classroom to access their prior knowledge? Do you know how to activate their prior knowledge? Do you know how to assess their prior knowledge? Because I think we are teaching in a very unilateral way most of the time. We use words like personalization, diversification, but what about at the beginning of the lesson, even before you present anything? So maybe we should do something. One thing that I do with my students, I apply a quiz. So yeah. Anyway, and the last one is learning requires, pause the video. Attention and rhyme and attention and memory. That was Eric Kandel. He won the Nobel Prize in 2000, I think. He studied sea slugs. They're very ugly animals, and they don't have as many neurons as humans, and actually no animal has as many neurons as we do. But they have a couple of thousands, I think, and we have 86 billion neurons, according to, I'm very proud of her, to be honest, Susana Herculano, a Brazilian scientist who discovered how to count our neurons, yeah. And it involves detergent and soup, so you can look her TED Talk up, okay? Susana with a Z, Herculano, and brain, okay? Anyway, so Eric Kandel, it's a very general, very broad claim that we need attention and memory, but indeed we do. If there is no attention, so first we have an obstacle from, for the stimulus that is coming to us or at us from the environment, right? So if we're listening to something, if we are seeing something, but we're not really paying attention, it stops right there. So it doesn't even, it doesn't even cross the threshold of, getting from the environment inside your head, basically. So you need attention. That's very important. So what does that tell us about making sure students are paying attention? It tells us a lot, a great deal actually, which is if they are not paying attention, maybe it would be a better idea for you to make sure they are before you carry it on. Yes, because otherwise they will have to learn whatever you're teaching outside the classroom because they will not learn there. And the second thing is attention. Yes, memory. If they cannot access that memory, that means they haven't learned. Or it means that maybe the retrieval of that memory is a little more complicated. It might be there somewhere in the cortex of the brain, but it's hard to access. And if it's hard to access, maybe the connections, the associations are not good enough. So we have to work with that. Okay, so I spoke a lot. I hope it was not distracting. It was probably distracting, but I did that on purpose in a way. Can you remember the 6? I'll give you some time, and you can pause the video now while I drink my tea. Pause the video. Try to remember. And if you want, you can actually write down. Okay, so pause the video, try to remember. Now, if you haven't paused the video, sorry, I'm going to go back and show you the 6 principles. So the first one is human brains are as unique as faces. The second one is that brains are different because of context and ability, and those influence learning. Our brains, they are changed by experience. Number four, our brains are highly plastic, so they keep rewiring and connecting and making new connections. And number five, the brain connects new information to old, remember prior knowledge. And finally, learning requires attention and memory, right? Okay, I hope it was easy to remember. I'm pretty sure it wasn't. And this is a very interesting exercise to do, because then you realize there were only 6 principles, right? I mean, that's not a very large number, but you couldn't remember many, most of them probably. What does that say about memory, huh? Now, I did, well, a brain break for you first. I like brain breaks because they give you some time to relax, access deeper connections. You can read my blog post about them. So here it goes.
I'm in love with the shape of you. We push and pull like a magnet do. Although my heart is falling too. I'm in love with your body. And last night you were in my room. And now my bedsheets smell like you. Every day discovering something brand new. Well, I'm in love with your body.
I love this video. I have 2 cats back in Brazil, and this cat in particular reminds me of my big fat cat named Blue. So I miss them. Oh, they're so cute. Anyway, this is the blog post that you can read, so you can access the QR code. You can, or you can just Google that, or go to my blog, my website, and you can find that. And it basically explains why brain breaks are a very nice strategy to use. You know, we normally give people a lot of information. It's hard to process. It's kind of like working out. If you don't take a break, you're going to get injured. So the same thing happens when we're focusing, trying too hard to do something, and maybe we're not getting anywhere, or maybe we are, but we have to take a break to kind of, you know, make ourselves relax and allow our brains to breathe a little. So our memories, actually. Active retrieval. What about the colors? So let me explain. During the session, I asked some of the participants to pay attention, you know, to look at the colors and try to memorize. The other ones had their eyes closed. And then I asked, do you think the colors helped you retrieve the information better? What do you think they answered? Well, I think the general answer was that not necessarily, not really, and that was a very good illustration of what neuroscience can do for us, and what it cannot do for us. A lot of the principles and a lot of the things that we have learned from brain research are not necessarily applicable, and I'd say could be very confusing at times. And this is the perfect example. So there are some researchers saying that if you associate whatever you're trying to learn with something, so if you add an association or a neural hook, like Barbara Oakley says, for example, color. So I have 6 principles. Each principle will have a specific color. Then it's easier for me to retrieve that, right? So if I have, for example, the first one, number 1, was yellow, that human brains are as unique as faces. Number 4 was green, that the brain is highly plastic. So maybe if I think about the color, that information will help me get the information that I need, right? There's a lot of research showing that. And you know, it possibly does work, actually. But there's a lot more research, or maybe not more, but there's a lot of research also saying that if I give you unnecessary things to think of, I'm going to overload your working memory, and then I'm actually reducing the likelihood of making sure that this information is going to be consolidated as long-term memory. So that means that if I'm giving you something extra to think of, like colors, that means I'm actually somehow reducing your memory's potential, or your potential to memorize something, because then you have too many things in your working memory. So this is a perfect example of what neuroscience can do and cannot do. And sometimes we do have this conflict and we have to be able to solve it. But do not lose hope yet. If you are here looking for a recipe, a fixed step-by-step, protocol to use with your classes, I'm sorry, maybe you can stop watching right now because that's not what I'm going to give you. But what I'm going to give you is a couple of things to think of and reflect on based on the brain science. And to be honest, there are things that we have really, and when I say we, I consider myself a researcher in the area now. And the scientific community, that's what I'm talking about. There are things we have discovered, and those things, they are pretty certain, some of the things that we have discovered, but we're still working our way up to, the top of the pyramid, let's say. It's going to take a long time because we don't have all the technology. Most of the studies that we carry out are in very controlled environments, labs with big machines like fMRI machines, the functional magnetic resonance imaging machine, and we have the EEG. So we have a lot of different types of techniques and tools, and they're not really the real class environment. So, of course, we can use the knowledge produced by the MBE science, which includes neuroscience, right? But we have to be careful, okay? And to show you that, think about this. Yes, do you agree with that? So I asked the participants in Barcelona, what is a neuromyth? What is the definition of a neuromyth? And then somebody said learning styles. Perfect. Learning styles is definitely a neuromyth, and I'm going to explain why. But what is it? How do you describe what is a neuromyth? So, and then somebody said a falsely held belief about how the brain works or something like that. And I think I said, I loved that description, that definition. I said a false claim about how the brain works and how we learn, and basically it's something that is not true about how the brain works. That's a neuromyth, right? And according to Tracy Tokuhama, there are a lot of neuromyths still being propagated in educational settings, and this is true. So true that it kind of, it led me to write this for the InnovateELT blog, so you can access. No, we don't use only 10% of our brains. No, we don't. And well, some people might. I'm just kidding. But I'm drinking some tea, and this is an analogy for you because I'm in England, so I'm trying to pack a lot of information using the symbol. I'm in England, and people apparently love their teas in England. And me too. I'm drinking Earl Grey with a splash of milk, and because I think this represents, it's something very simple. Tea. You have a mug, you have water, you have the tea bag right here. You have some milk, and I'm holding the mug, but you have no idea how many things are going on inside my brain right now. If you could actually put me inside an fMRI machine, and if I weren't teaching you about MB, just drinking tea and doing basically nothing else, there would be a lot of things. You would see a lot of activation everywhere in my brain because I'm using my vision, my sight to look at the mug as I grab the mug. So there is a lot of activation in the occipital lobe, the back part of my head. You would see a lot of activation in my sensory motor areas, cortex, the parietal lobe. You would see some activation in my temporal lobe because I'm thinking of the word tea. So this is where we process language normally, and everywhere. And and because I'm touching, it's hot. Again, sensory motor, so a lot of things would be going on. And even in the frontal lobes, because I'm making a decision I'm deciding to drink the tea right now, and that's just to show that our brains are really complex and we cannot really isolate things. There's no such thing as people having a brain that is more prone to one thing than the other. And I'm going to test your knowledge on neuromyths right now. So are you ready? So you just have to think, neurofact or neuromyth. So read and think. Okay. Well, this is a big myth. It's a big myth, and I'll tell you why. A lot of research has shown that learners do not benefit when they learn according to their learning style. And learning style is basically how students prefer to learn. It was based, so we have the acronym VARK for visual, auditory, reading, and kinesthetic, right? That was partially based on Howard Gardner's, multiple intelligences theory, and also some other authors before him. And it says that if I'm a visual learner, it's better if I receive visual input, because that means I will learn better. If I'm an auditory learner, I shouldn't worry about visual things because I will learn just, by listening to someone, the teacher or whatever. But that's not true, to be honest. It is useful in a way to think that everyone in the classroom has different learning styles, because then you sort of prepare your lesson catering for everyone's needs, I think. But if you had a classroom with 5 students who are all auditory, and you think that I don't need to use any visual aids because you know what, they're auditory, that's bad. Because there is a principle called dual coding. So if you're interested in that, Alan Badley talks about the working memory. Then we have 2 different channels, and we have a buffer that kind of synchronizes both. So one channel is called the visual spatial sketchpad, and the other one is the phonological loop for visual spatial for visual and spatial information, and the phonological loop for sounds, or phonology, right? And we need it's better if we encode information using both of those channels. So we need both visual and oral, or auditory information. We need that. It's better because then we have more representations of the same information in our brains. It's encoded dually. We can more easily access that. And not just in the classroom, but if we re-access or access again that information somewhere else, we will make another representation. So that's great. So again, it's not really true. I'm sorry, and Cambridge has been talking about this for a while. Kids are better language learners than adults. True or false? Well, this is a myth, I would say partially. It's hard to say, but honestly, there's a lot of evidence supporting the fact that kids are not necessarily the best learners, because they're going through the exuberant period. They're making millions of connections all the time. That's wonderful. That's great. But if you look at how long it takes a kid from the real beginning, let's say, as a real beginner, to get to a proficiency level, let's say C2, if you're working with CEFR, and the adult, the adult will get there faster, right? If they do things right. It will take kids for them to get to for them to pass from A1 to B1, it takes longer than for adults, because that's how kids courses are. And we can explain that very easily, because adults, they have more prior knowledge, they have more experience, more baggage, and also because adults, they can use their declarative memory. Declarative memory is the memory for notions, ideas, concepts, numbers, words, better than kids, because kids are still developing that. kids, they have better procedural memory. There is study by Dr. Avi Karni. I visited him at the University of Haifa in Israel, showing that adults can be better language learners than kids, given the right conditions. And sometimes we don't give them the right conditions, or maybe they're not in the right conditions, because you know what, adults, they have to worry about so many things. They have to work, they have to make money, and maybe it's not a brain thing, but a social thing. Okay, I'm saying that, okay, to make it clear, kids can learn faster than adults, but they're limited in what they can learn, and adults are not really. So who learns better? Huh? Okay, and you can read this blog post that I wrote not that long ago about the research that I'm doing here at the University of Bristol. And learning is more effective when we space out our studies, neurofact or neuromyth. This is definitely a neurofact. The spacing effect has been studied for a very long time. I believe the first person to write something about it was Hermann Ebbinghaus. He was a German psychologist, if I'm not mistaken, or physician. And then he tested himself with random syllables, and he realized that instead of trying to memorize a deck of a lot of different syllables in one go, like on the same day, it would be much better if he spaced out, the last time that he saw the deck, like he revised it, and the next one, because it would take him like 7, 8, maybe 9 repetitions to memorize a couple of tens of syllables, right? If he wanted to memorize all of them on the same day, it would take him 67 or 70 repetitions, so a lot more, right? So if we know that, we can schedule revisions throughout our lesson plans and help students somehow, plan when they're going to do homework, for example. So there are things we can do to help students incorporate this idea of spaced repetition. The brain records our reality objectively. This is definitely a neuromyth. It's not objectively. Our memories change all the time. We can actually have false memories. Do you remember the film Inception? It's kind of like that. We can actually plant false memories in people's minds, which is a little scary. And I think they kind of change over time. We add things that were not there. We forget things that were, and because of how we were feeling at the time, also when we created that memory. Yep. Bilingualism delays neurodegenerative diseases. This is definitely a neurofact. Yes, some studies show that even by 5, 6, or 7 years, 5 years on average. So if you are going to have, because we haven't found the cure for dementia, Alzheimer's disease, for example, if you are going to have those diseases, the fact that you are a bilingual will actually delay those, the early symptoms by 5 years, which is great. And no, you're not going to get extra years if you are trilingual, if you are a polyglot, if you know a lot of different languages. For every language I get like an extra 5 years. I don't think so. I haven't seen any research about that. And the right side of the brain is in charge of creativity. It's definitely a neuromyth, unfortunately. I know some people will say that lateralization, if you want to check it out, what it means, you will find some research. But honestly, creativity is a global process. So you will need to use different parts of your brain for creativity. And in creativity in what? If you are writing something, I'm trying to be a creative writer, you are using a lot of your left hemisphere, probably because you process language in your temporal lobe, right? So that's where you process language. So if you're writing, you need to use that. And again, I think this myth sort of gave rise to this idea that there are people who are more left-brained, they're more analytical, cold, uh, calculist and things like that, and more right-brained. They are very creative, artistic, and things like that. There is a little truth to creativity being on the right side. Yes, we know that music and arts, they will activate certain areas that are more localized in your right hemisphere, but it's not like that. It's not like an absolute divide. Okay. And then finally, cognition and emotions or emotion are opposite sides of a coin. True or false, or better, neurofact or neuromyth? It's definitely a neuromyth. And Antonio Damasio, Portuguese neuroscientist, wrote about that a very long, well, not so long ago, a couple of years ago. I went to his city, Lisbon, to film, to shoot my neuroscience and learning online course. And you cannot really separate cognition from emotion. You cannot make emotional, or better, you cannot make rational decisions. If you think about that, you always need emotions to make decisions. And a very interesting case was Elliot, one of his patients, who had suffered damage to some of his subcortical areas in charge of emotional response. And because of that damage, he could not experience or feel emotions like we can, and he could not make decisions. He would be stuck inside his head trying to decide whether to go to restaurant A or B, because according to Antonio Damasio, he didn't have the lift that emotions give us. That lift, like they incline us a little bit to the left or right to a restaurant A or B. So emotions are very important. What does that say about how we are dealing with our students' emotional intelligence, huh? Can we just suppress their emotions? You don't need to feel anything. Just learn this, Think, look at this boy, think. And I wrote about this. I used Captain Marvel. Don't know why. I'm a big nerd, I guess, and I really love the Marvel movie, so you can read this one. Okay. Should teachers know this stuff? Well, before we go, I love brain breaks again. Before we go any further, a quick brain break for you about Mr. Trunk. So which of these countries has Mr. Trunk not been to? Take a guess, take a guess, take a guess, take a guess. And the answer is Turkey. He's not been to Turkey. He's been to Iceland. He's been to Mexico, to the city of Tequila. He's been to Spain, Madrid and Barcelona, and Argentina, Buenos Aires. Yes, Mr. Trunk travels, hashtag. Now, should teachers know? Well, listen to my great Professor Paul Howard-Jones and see for yourself.
Myself and many other people feel there's a real urgency to bring neuroscience and the science of learning into teacher training and development. The fellowship that I've enjoyed here, supported by the IBE and by IBRO, has given me the opportunity to consider how ready we are to do that. And it's allowed me to draw on the expertise of people here with educational knowledge, which is global, and understand how that educational knowledge can be connected to what we're understanding about learning from the sciences of the mind and the brain. What I've found out is that we can now talk about basic good practice in the classroom in terms of how the brain functions. And I think that we are now ready to go forward with that. And so I feel very excited going back to the United Kingdom and being able to tell educators there that we need to start introducing teachers to the brain, talking about learning in terms of the brain.
Is it something new, all this brain issues thinking, or is it something that's been going on for a long time?
We've been thinking for maybe 2 decades about connections between neuroscience and education, But still, teacher training and professional development generally does not include a scientific understanding of how we learn. And therefore there is a real sense that we should be thinking about how we can progress this. How can we go forward? What would a curriculum for teachers about how the brain learns look like? And the 3 months I've had here has given me the chance to map that out and understand what it might look like as we deliver it to teachers.
Okay, now this is Paul Howard Jones. I'm a huge fan. He was autographing his book, The Evolution of the Learning Brain. So if you'll excuse me, this is the book. You can find it somewhere. So if you want to know how our brains evolved, I really recommend. It's a great book. I'm a huge fan, and I'm also a huge fan of wine. That was a very good book launch, free wine. And yes, I think teachers should know some stuff. But again, he was the one who said, there is no fixed recipe. There's only so much we can do as neuroscientists, as researchers. And I think the biggest debate now, and I think a lot of the criticism that our area is getting is we're not bridging the gap between theory and practice, educational practice, because it's hard. It is hard for us to find, a way, an effective way to communicate the findings, because again, they are not very particular. I mean, they're not so specific that they're going to work all the times. Okay? And well, take it from this guy. And I think, so anybody who's involved in education should become literate in understanding something about the biology of the mind, which means knowing something about the brain and something about genetics. And this guy joined the MBE department at Harvard. Howard Gardner, the guy who wrote about multiple intelligences. There's a TED talk of this guy saying that learning styles are a myth. So listen to him. What really works according to the Education Endowment Foundation, and why am I showing you this? Because I think a lot of school managers, they spend a lot of money trying to get the best interactive whiteboards and a lot of technology, iPads and maker spaces and labs and things like that. They're great. But what really works, according to this, is feedback. Feedback, we have a lot of research about feedback. Carol Dweck, for example, with her principle of growth mindset, talks about feedback and how important it is for you to get feedback and to be praised for effort and not really for the product or your intelligence, right? And the second thing, metacognitive strategies. So what are metacognitive strategies? They are strategies based on how we think, on how our brains work. So, and then again, I didn't really give you a lot of strategies, to be honest, here. Maybe a couple brain breaks, stop a little, use your students' emotions on their behalf or on your behalf, actually. And okay, what next? Education 4.0, that's what I call it. So there is a pyramid, and I think Education 4.0 should be something like this. The top, at the bottom, we should have 21st century skills like communication, collaboration, creativity, and critical thinking. But we should also include another C, choice, autonomy. We should probably work with active learning methods more, project-based learning, and projects. That's what I have an online course about active learning methods, ancient Greek philosophy, and I talk about project-based learning. And I think, yes, we can integrate technology because that's what our students have nowadays in the world, in their homes, right? But I really like the idea of giving them more autonomy, more choice, so that they can work on the things that they like. And that is very uncomfortable for us teachers. We want to control this messy environment, right? It's more like trying to, teaching can be chaos, but sort of guided chaos, you know. Just try to make sure that nobody kills. No, I'm kidding, but try to make sure that they are going a certain direction. It doesn't have to be a straight line, but they're getting somewhere. And finally, the top of the pyramid, brain-friendly techniques. And there are a bunch of brain-friendly techniques. I think I would love to to suggest a couple of books for you. So this is Tracy Tokuhama Espinosa's Making Classrooms Better. Making Classrooms Better. Okay. 50 practical applications of mind-brain education. So you should definitely read this one. Very good. You can also get John Hattie's Maximize Impact on Learning. So visible learning for teachers. That's also great. 800 meta-analyses. Wow. And he says that, you know, what matters in the classroom? The teacher, basically. I mean, it's how we make those decisions, you know, based on this experience that we have, that, you know, it's us. And this one is in Portuguese, but I think it's how we learn in English, how we learn, the surprising truth of when, how, and why learning happens. I think that's what it's called in English, and it's Benedict Carey. He's not a scientist, but he was a journalist that put together 10 effective strategies of how to learn best. And I'd like to end here. It says, imagine if instead of the digestive system of worms, our kids learned how their brains work and how they can learn better. Can you imagine that? Would that change things? You know who said this? I'm pretty sure it was me. I think so, but maybe I'm wrong. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. This was a bit longer than what I presented in Barcelona, and I have an online course about all of this and more, so you can sign up. Just, you know, go to my blog. You will find links there to get more information about the course. You know, I've been offering the course for a couple of months now. I'm still working on a bigger course that I'm filming all over the world, and I would really appreciate if you could be one of my students. Yes. Again, if you need to talk to me, access my blog. You have the address there. Send me an email. Just reach out, okay? I'm on social media, and I hope this was useful, and I hope I did bust some of the neuromyths, but there are many more, and we're still fighting the good fight. Bye-bye, everyone, and I hope you have a wonderful week. See you soon.